Preparing for interviews is a necessary evil, and sometimes it is hard to sift through who to listen to and what to expect. So on this episode, join me and Don Gleason as we give you the lowdown on a few tips to consider the top interview questions and the best way to answer them so that you can stand out as the top candidate. Welcome back to another episode of the Just Get Hired podcast. This is your go-to resource for the latest workplace trends, hiring tips, and all things career related. I'm your host, Jessica Fiesta George, and I want you to understand how to navigate through this challenging job market. Don, are you ready to give us a quick guide to answering interview questions and the common pitfalls to avoid?
I certainly am. I appreciate the opportunity to get on board, and thanks for what you're doing. This is awesome.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to spill the sauce. And speaking of sauce, I want to thank the Spicy Gnome Hot Sauce for sponsoring the series. If you haven't tried it yet, these are craft hot sauces that are not only going to spice up your meal, but it's going to kickstart your career move. So go to thespicygnome.com to order yours today. So
Great.
I want to do a quick intro, Don. Make sure if I'm missing anything, you jump in. Don is a career transition expert who's been helping people find jobs that actually energize them. Don is the CEO and president of Achieve New Heights, and he has over 42 years of experience in military and in the private sector. He's not only a coach, but he's a mentor, a public speaker, and I think that makes him the go-to person for career advice and organizational development. Did I miss anything?
You did not. That was fantastic. Yeah.
Well, welcome into the Just Get Hired podcast. And I hope we're going to give our audience some insights on what they can do to answer some of these crazy interview questions that they might face during an interview. So if you're ready, let's get started.
Let's do it.
All right. So we know the classic interview question. Tell me about yourself. How do you suggest candidates approach that question without giving their entire life story? What should they focus on?
I think a lot about the resume and the summary. And what we end up doing a lot of times is we give a inclusive summary on the resume all about our life, right? 42 years experience, I did this. And what I'm really trying to talk to people now on the resume, and I think it applies here as well, is it should be a summary of what you've done that ties into the job description, right? They're there. They've got limited time. They're interviewing a lot of candidates. They want to know how you qualify. Sure, you can say a little bit about, yeah, I'm married. I got 3 kids. I love to camp and hike. It's a little bit of personal stuff, but it should really focus in on that job description. Why, and not just a list, but why you're almost leading into why you're the best candidate, but you're talking about some of the things you've done that relate to that.
Okay. I will also say some of the common pitfalls with that as well is that even though you want to bring a little bit of life to your story and share just a little bit about your personal life, sharing things like you have kids and you're married could also be kind of touchy because it can be a form of discrimination if you're like, well, I have kids and I have to take them to daycare. And so like the employer starts putting that bias in their mind that, okay, well, maybe they're going to ask for more time off. So just be careful. I want to caution people when you're starting to share information that you don't overshare when it comes to that.
Yeah, that leads into a good point, which is your research on the company. What is the company like? Have you talked to some people in the company? What is their perspective on that? Are the leaders, the interviewers going to be really focused in on potentially that bias? Or do they recognize that you have that life outside and they want you to have that life outside and they're going to try to help you balance that out? So if you do some research on that, you will be much smarter. I don't know if there's a canned way to do that question.
No, there really isn't.
I think you have to do the research, understand the company, get some advice from people in there and see what they're looking for.
Absolutely. Well, one common one as well is the question, why do you want to work here? So what are some key points to hit on when you answer that question to show that you're genuinely interested in that company?
What I always do is because I take myself back to 5th grade and the first Earth Day in 1970, and that's why I wanted to work in the environmental field, and I was really good at math and science. And I kind of touch on that story a little bit of if I'm applying to be in the environmental field, I want them to know that this is I'm not just here for the job. This is my career. This is my passion, my purpose. And I want to touch a little bit on that story. Now, I'm not going into incredible detail on
Right.
that story, but just like I just did, right? I got motivated to be in the environmental field in the 5th grade, the first Earth Day. And I was really good at math and science. I was always ahead of my peers. And I went to the University of Wisconsin to get my environmental engineering degree. And and got into the Air Force for experience, and I want to continue that passion to help. And I've really enjoyed how you have, kind of referencing back to their website, you're working on these type of projects, and I've got great experience in that area, and I want to continue to grow in that area.
Well, speaking of storytelling, so there's behavioral questions, situational questions. So we're
Hmm.
going to try to touch on both of those if we have time. But
Okay.
behavioral questions, it's a lot about storytelling. So,
Hmm.
what is your advice for crafting a compelling story when someone says something like, describe a challenging situation and how you handled it, or any type of behavioral question? What's your tip?
This is an interesting point because when I was interviewing with Booz Allen Hamilton as I came out of the service, we were in Salt Lake City at a conference, and I got to the dinner, and we were going through the questions. And I told my wife later, I said, it was like there was sometimes 3 questions on the table that I was trying to answer at the same time. And she goes, well, maybe you said too much. I said, yeah, but I need to tell a story about it, right? I can't just
Hmm.
say, oh, I've got 15 years experience on that, and I think I could do really well. Well, okay, that's there, but they don't have the confidence, the trust in just stating the statement. You need to give a little bit about the situation. I faced an exact situation like that when I was on a contract here, and this was the problem, and this is how we solved it, and here was the results. I'm thinking just like what we talk about in a resume with
Hmm.
star bullet,
Right.
right? Situation, task, action, result. Give a little bit of that. Donald Miller does a great job in Story Brand, and he talks that
Mm.
every book, every movie has a hero, they have a problem, they have a guide, they work through the solution. So that's the theme that we are used to in a book and a movie, and we should almost kind of bring that same idea forward, because the people that are listening, the hiring authority, the recruiters, they're looking for that connection. They're looking for the emotion. If you can pull them into, I just think of one. Here's a quick one, right? I was in Baghdad working the reconstruction, and one morning, one of my
Hmm.
contractors walked in with $100 million change order. He said,
Wow.
sir, I don't have time for you to ask any questions or to explain it. I just need you to sign this. And I'm thinking, $100 million, right? I've been a base civil engineer for years. I'm a squadron commander, and my entire program was $100 million. And I'm going to put my name on something blindly, right? Now I'm creating that tension, the
Right.
stress point a little bit. And that's what so now the listener is kind of like, how did he solve it? Right. And I,
Hmm.
and I did. I looked at the gentleman that morning and I said, I can give you 2 options. One, you can sit down for 5 minutes and explain this to me, or you can go find somebody else to design it, because I'm not putting my name on $100 million blindly. There's no way. 5 minutes is pretty short. And
Right.
and we walked through it and we solved it. And there's a whole bunch more that went into that, because that led into a whole. Why is it $100 million change order? What's going on? And we
Well, did you
followed
end
it
up
up with that.
signing this change
I did.
order? Ooh,
Yeah.
that's that's scary in itself.
2020. Yeah. And 20 years later, it hasn't come back to haunt me. So
There you go.
that's
So
good.
we're in
But
the clear for now.
that's right.
So hopefully, if anyone's listening in the
Yeah.
military, like,
That's
don't
right.
go find Don. It's in the past.
That's right. That's right. But I think it's that story of just like what Don Miller talks about in the book and a movie, and bring the suspense out. Help them
I like that.
feel the passion of the stress in the story,
I like
and
that.
that you fixed it.
True. Well, what
Mhm.
are some of the biggest mistakes that you see candidates make when they're answering behavioral questions? If they're not telling the story, any horror stories or lessons that we can probably give to people?
What makes you different? What makes you the best candidate? And they come back with, well, I've had these jobs. I've got this degree. I've got this year's experience. And I think back to when I was a base civil engineer, and there was 66 of us across the Air Force.
Mm.
And we all had pretty much the exact same job description. We all had a master's degree. We all had, almost everything was identical. So the question is, what set some people apart? Because when I was there, one of them got to be a 2-star general. Several of them got to be 1-star generals. A number
Nice.
of them retired as a lieutenant colonel. I was in the middle and went to colonel, full colonel. So what made the difference, right? And I think the biggest mistake is trying to rely on those things of years experience, degree,
Mm.
the jobs you've held. It really relies into how you use all of that to solve problems. And if you don't make that jump, I think that's probably the biggest mistake.
Okay. Now I
Mhm.
want to pivot to situational questions because I
Yeah.
feel like those are a little tricky because a lot of it is hypothetical. So
Mhm.
how should candidates approach questions like what would you do if XYZ? Without sounding too rehearsed or generic, how would you approach that?
I would always start with, well, let me summarize that a little bit to make sure that I understand the question.
Okay.
I don't think that's a problem at all, right? Because we are going to, based on what they say, we're going to create a situation in our head and
Hmm.
we're going to respond. And we may or may not be answering the same question that they're trying to ask.
True. No,
There
that's
may be
good.
something, because we all have, what is it? It's preconceived notions. I can't think of the right word, but we all have those things inside of us that in our perceptions of what they're saying. So I would repeat it back to them and probably put a little characteristic around it. And then I would try to build into that, talking about reference back to what I did in a very similar situation to that. It could be tough just to try to address that question, but if you can
Hmm.
bring back into the story about how you did that, I think that would really work well.
Okay. Well, let's go with the pitfalls to avoid during an interview. So, what are the common pitfalls or one of the things candidates should never
Mhm.
do in an interview?
Yeah, one is, as you just kind of said a minute ago, right? Being too practiced. That
Mm-hmm.
you've memorized it. You want to come across with a personality. I say a lot of that with people on LinkedIn. They take their resume, which is all about job descriptions. There's no story in there. 95% of the resumes I see don't have a story in the accomplishment bullets. It's just I did this, and they copy paste it over, and then they try to bring that into the interview. I've done this, I've done this, I've done this, but there's not a story. They haven't brought the personality piece into it. And that's what LinkedIn is really good at. And that's what you really want to bring forward in the interview is I'm a person and
Right.
I've faced challenges and I can make these things happen. So I think being too practiced would be a real problem.
Okay.
I think one thing I do is I'm a certified DISC personality assessment consultant, and not reading the room is another mistake, right?
Yes.
If I sit down and the gentleman across from me, if I look at his day timer and it's all organized and there's no yellow stickies, there's no paper in there, he's probably more of a C type
Yeah.
personality. He wants the details. So if I don't give him the details, he's not going to connect with me. But on the
Correct.
flip side, if he's a D, he walks in and says, "Let's get down to action here. This is what we're going to do. We got 15 minutes. It's all about results." Then you better be fairly short and brief, and don't get into a 5-minute story because he's gonna tune off. He's gonna cut you off. It's not going to be there, so you're going to miss it. So reading the room and the person, I think, is important. And then I hate to say it again, but those stories. And
Yes.
I always tell people to have like a 2-minute and a 5-minute version of every story, um,
Okay.
because you're going to have that deep personality. You just want to get in, hit the kind of highlights, and be done. But the next guy, you can feel him wanting more. You want to be able
Hmm.
to give more. I think that's. I get concerned when I talk to people about they use other people to write their resume, especially even with AI today. AI is pulling things in based upon the great data history out on
Right.
the web, etc. So is that all true? Is it couched in the right way? Do I know what's really in my resume? And can I speak to it? And I really focus in on nobody knows your background, your history, the projects you led, the reasons you did certain things better than you. So you
True.
need to be intricately involved in the resume writing so that you know the story, because that's what they're asking about. Tell me a little bit more about this one. And if you contradict what's sitting there, they're like, what's going on, right? So you better darn well know your resume and be able to articulate to those stories. That's probably the three things I think would be the most important for me.
Okay. Well, I am an I, and you probably know that already just by talking to me. But I
Yep.
have had to learn, and I used to be DISC certified. So anyone who's out there who wants to understand DISC, reach out to Dawn, look it up
Mm.
online. But it's really something powerful that I feel a lot of people should really get to understand, because it's helped me as well, even presenting to the C-suite or to the leadership team. I know like who is good with the small talk and is okay with me just being me. But I
Yeah.
know when I walk into a room, the ones who need things in bulleted form or who just need me to be like quick in and out. So I think
Yep.
it's really important to also understand that in an interview. So great point
Yeah.
there. But before we wrap up, Don, oh, go ahead.
Can I say one thing on that? And I
Absolutely.
appreciate what you just said. So I was in a, I'm with the John Maxwell team, and every Thursday at 11 we get together and we talk about disc. And
Okay.
yesterday it was the 3 secrets of each disc style,
Mhm.
and we were talking about the I style. And one thing that I've always learned is I's want to participate. They want to inject into the conversation, right? They want to be a part of it. And she said it's not just that they want to, they
Mhm.
need to. They've got to
Guilty.
be in the conversation. Yeah, well, and it's just the personality. So,
Yeah.
but if you get in with a D and the D just wants to get things done, and you don't get the opportunity, you have to recognize yourself, right? Self-awareness is number one, then recognize others. So you can't fight the individual who's leading the interview and say, "Hey, you didn't give me an opportunity to really explain. I want to go deeper." That could
Hmm.
potentially just frustrate them. So what you need to come back with is understanding of, oh, I need to, but he doesn't need to let me. And
Right.
how do I work that through, right? And so maybe you walk out of the room, or you catch him on the way out, just and you say, "I want to give you just a little bit more on that," or something, or maybe you tell somebody else. Um, but you've got to recognize yourself in that situation. That's why I think DISC is so powerful in the job search process.
Yes.
Understanding ourselves, but understanding the others and how we mesh that together, because we have to communicate to others in their style. So we have
True.
to be able to adjust that. So thanks for adding your piece on that. That was cool. We'll have to share
Yeah,
more
we should
about DISC
probably
sometime.
do another episode about DISC itself. Just, I think
Yeah.
that's a good episode because there's so many dynamics to that. Like I mentioned, I was DISC certified. I am predictive index certified now. So I've been
Ah,
using more
okay.
predictive index. So we can probably go down a rabbit hole. So I'm going to keep the
Hmm.
invitation open and maybe we do another
Okay.
episode on that. But
Yeah.
where can people find you and achieve new heights if they want more career advice or coaching?
I do have a website, achievenewheights.com, and I'm revamping it. It's going to be launching any day now. So hopefully before this episode comes out, we'll be launched. But LinkedIn is where I really do most things. Don with the middle initial L for Lima, Leonard, Gleason. I'm the only one with the middle initial L. There's like 65 Don Gleasons out there. So you got to use the middle initial L. Send me a note. And what I love to offer is if you just reference that, hey, I listened to you on the Just Get Hired podcast. I will say, hey, let's get together for a complimentary 30 minutes. Let's see how I can add value to you, give you some advice, answer some questions, right? It's just my way of giving back. And then we'll go from there.
I appreciate that. Yeah, there's so many Jessica Georges. So if you're on
Is that right?
LinkedIn, you can find me by searching my full name, Jessica Fiesta George, because
Fiesta.
Fiesta is my maiden name. And I was like, there's too many Jessica Georges in this world, but not a lot of Jessica Fiesta Georges.
There you go. Yeah.
So yeah, find Dawn on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. If you found this episode valuable, make sure you click that subscribe button, whether that's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts. I'm also boosting up my YouTube channel. So head over to that
Right.
channel and subscribe there as well. But if we would love to hear your feedback. So don't forget to leave a review, share this episode with your friends or your colleagues if you want more interview advice or career tips. And if you have any questions that you want me to cover in a future episode, feel free to reach out to me on all of the social media channels. I'm now on TikTok, Instagram and LinkedIn. Just search Just Get Hired. And lastly, if you want to connect with Don and his company, Achieve New Heights, I'm going to make sure we put all of the links that we're talking about in the show notes. Stay tuned for our next episode. We're going to spill the sauce on more career tips, thanks to the Spicy Gnome for their support. Thanks again for listening. And remember, whether you're just starting your career or you're making a transition, you are not alone. We've got your back. So see you next time on the Just Get Hired podcast.